Welcome, party people. Thank you so much for coming here and hearing from our amazing presenters. We are so lucky to have these two folks come in for us and present this amazing information for us all. And I just want to kind of do some housekeeping here. Thanks everyone for your questions. Keep them coming in, put them in the Q&A section there really quick, and we'll get through them. And remember to complete the session evaluation located under the video player beside the discussion tab. And remember that after the discussion for today, go to the day 2 wrap up. Now, welcome, Selena and Cheyenne. I'm so excited to be talking to both of you. Such accomplished experts in this area.
We are so lucky to have.
I'm getting a little bit of.
That was Cheyenne.
That was me. Oh. Okay. Okay, great. Well, I'm going to start us off on the questions because I have the microphone and can do that. So what I would really like to know is, given the context, the broad context of everything you brought for us today, what are some examples of how Indigenous worldview could look like within the housing sector? Do you have specific examples?
We're very lucky to work with a program here in Edmonton, and if you get a chance, they are also involved in the conference today, and it's a program run out of Edmonton, Umama Wangogamic, where we see them making strides to reincorporate the family structures and the kinship structures that we were talking about during our presentation. So that's a very real and tangible way that we can see how that's impacting housing. And if you want, Selena could go into explaining exactly how that program looks and how we're involved in it.
Yeah, so it's a really great program, Indigenous led, which is, I think, one of the most important things. A very integrated support structure. So not only is it like supportive housing for the residents there, with your basic needs, getting social work and groceries and how do you pay your bills and that kind of thing, but also like very much connection to culture and ceremony. There's always ceremonial events going on. There's elders that live on site that are there to mentor specifically the youth, but also like young families. We have a lot of non-staff elders also on site, so we see like that more multi-generational living accommodation. And I think that that's a really important aspect of that, is having that circular generation of knowledge between the connections made between the youth in the building and the elders in the building there. Cheyenne, did you have anything else to add from the housing there, that specific program?
Yeah. Well, and so there's that specific program, right, which we can draw concrete evidences of, when we have multiple generations living together, that we can kind of see a reintroduction of a lot of the important things that we were talking about. And as well as like uplifting, especially single mother households around the housing structures. We have a lot of expectations about what a family should look like in order to get housing. And a major part of this presentation was to kind of break down those expectations, especially the expectations that we have on Indigenous families and what Indigenous families should look like so that they are able to get housing. And so being able to break down some of those nuances so that we can see family in a different light just would better impact housing and how we talk about housing. And so that's kind of where I was coming at it with that. I hope I answered your question, kind of, sort of.
I think you did. I think it's a fantastic point. I think that the expectations around what is and is not appropriate housing for various family groups are settler constructs, and that's very clear. So thank you very much for that. Now, I do have a question about the presentation itself. The presentation is being shared, but specifically the link to the image with all of the Cree language on it that you were referencing. Somebody mentioned it was a little blurry, so I wondered if they could get it. hold of it?
Yeah. So I think actually I apologize, but I forgot to throw this on the references page. I don't know if that was clear in our presentation because we had to cut off a couple minutes, but we do, if you download that presentation, there is a reference page that has a lot of links for the stuff that we discussed in the presentation. Unfortunately, we left this one out. So I'm just going to post a link in the chat here. This is a blog post by Chelsea Vowell that has that image on there, and also has a really good discourse on family and kinship terms, which we found really interesting and informed some of our information that we relayed here in this presentation. So definitely, if you have a chance, give that a read. It was really interesting.
Okay, I just dropped that link in the chat for the live stream so people can access that. All right, thanks so much. Now, thanks so much for this discussion. I'm getting a question from Jane here. I wonder if you can speak more explicitly to how land back relates to how we think of home.
Yeah, so in the way that I have been taught about land back is that land back to me is about land sovereignty. So sovereignty going back to Indigenous people, and land back looks a lot more than just land. For people that haven't quite heard this term before or want expansion on it, right? It's more than just the land. It's the idea that with the land and with the seizure of our land, we lost language, we lost culture, we lost ceremony and family structure. So by bringing this idea of land back, we're saying that Indigenous people deserve sovereignty over their own systems that have existed for thousands of years before colonial contact. And so I think that land back intrinsically works its way into this, because it kind of sets us aside and says, we shouldn't be seeing colonial influences on our family systems, on our housing structures. So land back being a very important part of it. Going forward and talking about land back and how that can influence housing, we talk a lot about especially our Indigenous houseless people, and here on the streets of Edmonton, of what giving land back to them looks like. Some of them don't actually want physical plots of land. They don't want to be tied down to structures like that, because even still, owning land, owning a house is still a colonial structure and idea of success. So by removing our ideas of how people want to live and how they want to live on the land is the best way that we can support people who, live this lifestyle and choose to live this lifestyle, that they can still be supported under land back ideas. So
Awesome.
Yeah, it's a broad concept. I love talking about it, but I could deep dive into it forever, really.
And I think also in like a more practical sense too, in the program that we are participating in, a lot of that like reintroduction to your cultural knowledge and language actually comes through education on the land as well. So when you are learning your teachings, you're on the land and you're pointing to the rocks and to the plants, and it has so much knowledge to give. And I think that connection to these like living spaces is so important, because that's kind of like where the whole worldview is built on, as well as it's so tied to the land. So when we have land theft and people saying, no, you can't be here, like for example in Edmonton, and you're houseless and you get shuffled and you're losing that sense of place and that sense of connection to that land that you're on, and you're often criminalized for being there. And that's all those like colonial concepts of land ownership. So we're challenging the idea that these conceptions of ownership are like taking away home as well, and directly being able to go back and connect to that is a way of creating home for us as a community, as a culture.
Yeah, I think that's great. I think also during the process, it might have been Cheyenne that said, and I wrote it down really quick, our spirit is built into our language, right? When we're talking about this broader concept of the disconnection from land, disconnection from culture, disconnection from language, disconnected from all of these things as a result of colonization, Do you want to just talk about the importance of language in that whole process?
Language is definitely, for me, during my reconnection process to culture, land played an absolutely massive role for me. And for a lot of us, the land itself, like when I introduce myself, like that I am from somewhere, that I directly connect my heritage and who I am as a person to a actual piece of land that I claim as home. And that's a very important concept when we're talking about language and land and how that is all connected. And we were really talking too about the spirit and the soul that is contained within the language, and how important that is. And even when they give us our names, that it is within the language and that we are known in Cree. They don't know us by our English names, if that makes sense. And so I'm kind of losing my train of thought. So I'm going to let Selena pick up on this.
Yeah, sure. Um, for spirit as well, that it could be that connection to your worldview and belief system and culture. And we were having a discussion before how, when you are translating from one language to another, you lose so much of that meaning and context. So when we're speaking in Cree, it's really like actually connecting to those bigger ideas and belief systems, just inherent into the like underlying meaning within the language, and how we were talking about how all these words are connected, and it's really showing that underlying like what we as Cree people think is important, and those connections that we make, I think, are part of that spiritual knowledge, that's so important. And that's been an enjoyable part of reconnecting to the language, is really discovering like what um
It
like
broadens like
really the worldview.
Yeah, the
Mhm.
worldview. And how many times I have heard elders say when I'm like asking them something, then they're speaking to me back in Cree, and I'm like, I don't understand. I need you to translate. And they're telling me that it's difficult for them to translate these ideas from Cree into English, because it just and what they say over and over again is that English doesn't contain the heart, because as we discussed through the presentation, the land is linked to the language, and all of those are connected to the people. And a big part of colonial language coming over and dominating over Turtle Island is that it doesn't have that connection to the land. English lacks the depth of understanding that Nehiyaw and Nehiyawewen holds, because it's intrinsically connected to the land. So that's why it's difficult for elders to be able to communicate with their young sometimes, because it's concepts that aren't able to translate over into English. And that's why it's really important that we do learn our language as part of reconnection, and elders emphasize that all the time. So it's important for us as young people to recognize its validity, that it's not just something that you're reading, it's something that you're learning something about yourself every time you learn your traditional language.
Absolutely. What are some effective and practical ways non-Indigenous people can do to support decolonization? And by the way, this person, Helen, wants to tell you that you both did an amazing presentation with lots of information.
Thanks,
Oh,
Helen. Yeah, I think maybe I can start with that. I would say first, get a little bit of the history primer, right? Really learn how to unpack your own biases and recognize how our historical past has led to the propagation of these stereotypes and biases. And that's like the easiest work you can do, right? Is to change yourself, and then go on to support others that are doing this work. Like the program that we're talking about, Umamu Wangogamek, this is like a brand new program. Not very many people, or organizations, I should say, have these programs going. It's brand new. So advocate for Indigenous-led solutions to housing problems. Advocate for your organization to support and engage with these organizations, and make sure that there's more room at the table for Indigenous leaders in your organizations as well. And I think with that, us as Indigenous people will bring that perspective with us to these tables to help make those more practical solutions at the policy level. Yeah,
And
Cheyenne, did you have anything?
yeah, another thing oftentimes is that, I don't know any of you guys personally within the chat, but I know for myself that I operate within academic circles. That's where I am. That's the part of the life that I'm in right now as a student, and I will probably remain in academia for a little bit. And so these are the kinds of interactions that I'm having. And it's really important to acknowledge that Indigenous knowledge is just as valid as academic knowledge, that a doctor in psychology will, our elders contain a lot of that knowledge. And so it's about recognizing the wealth and depth of Indigenous knowledge. And when you do bring people to the table, that you are respecting them just as much as you would someone who is highly educated, because they are highly educated. They are highly educated in the land, in the culture, in the people. So that respect and reciprocity is very important. If you want to work with Indigenous people, learn protocol, make effort, and also don't put because a lot of the time what is acknowledged by other Indigenous people around me is that a lot of the time the weight is put on them to do the teaching. A lot of these resources are out there, and ask the first time, and then remember and try to reinforce that into your life. And
Or pay people for their knowledge.
absolutely. Like reciprocity for knowledge, like elders that come in and help you, that is 70 years worth of knowledge. That is 80 years worth of knowledge. They deserve to be compensated and taken care of for that knowledge that they've earned. So yeah, a big part of decolonization is recognizing and bringing Indigenous people to the table, and vote for Indigenous representation. Vote for Indigenous politicians if they are people that you want to support. Obviously, like, not telling you to vote for whoever, but like I got really excited to vote for my 2 Indigenous people on 2 separate ballots this year, and it made me incredibly proud as an Indigenous person. And it means a lot to us to have that kind of representation. It really does. So yeah.
Okay. Well, thank you very much for giving us the benefit of your research and the work that you've done in this. And thank everybody for coming. I really appreciate all of you that sat through and enjoyed learning some of this stuff. So thank you so much, and see you in the wrap up.
Thanks, everyone.
Okay, so I'm going to just pause the recording.